news is that in spite of what we are hearing, that Brazil might, the steps of Brazil might cause the fragmentation of the internet and maybe even the isolation of certain countries. Brazil is still online, and we can see Diego and we can see Marilia for the time being. We'll see what's going to happen. It has been really a hectic couple of months, I think, when it comes to the high politics and internet governance, ever since the Snowden affair appeared. And since July, August, we've seen very, very strong steps of some Latin American states and at first Brazil with regards to bringing internet governance high on a political and diplomatic agenda. And we have seen a couple of steps of primarily the president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, when it comes to bringing the issues of surveillance, of internet governance, and so on, and even changing the policy models with regards to Brazil and probably global, since Brazil is one of the most powerful parties in this international negotiation. It's my pleasure today to welcome firstly all of you participants of the webinar, and we'll definitely have a lot of space for questions and discussion later on. But with us we have Marilia Maciel, the director of the Center of Technology and Society of the Getulio Vargas Foundation. I'm not sure if I pronounced it well, Marilia. And we have Diego Canabarro, who is a doctoral student in Internet Governance at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and also a visiting researcher at the University of Massachusetts. With two of them who are very well into what's happening in terms of internet governance and, of course, especially the role of Brazil. Today we are going to discuss a couple of issues. Firstly, we'll start from the top political level of diplomacy to some extent, and the information that the Brazilian president canceled her visit to the US or postponed her visit to the US. So what does that signal, and how important that is, and to what extent this is going to even change the relations between US and Brazil. On the second level, we are going to discuss how the NSA disclosures and the surveillance impacted Brazilian political and regulatory landscape. So what is currently happening in Brazil? Then we will also cover the topic of multi-stakeholder model on the level of Brazil as well as globally, because Brazil used to be one of the biggest supporters of the multi-stakeholder model, whether that has changed and what are the forecasts. And finally, what can we expect as a forthcoming development coming from South America, including the cooperation with countries like Russia, China, India, South Africa, so BRICS countries, and also reference to the new cables, to the possible pushes towards the cloud services like Facebook, Google, and so on, to store the data on the local level. And I welcome you all to post questions at any time, even though we'll probably bring the questions and summarize them occasionally and put them forward to the two panelists. Let me maybe start with Marilia. Marilia, recently you also had, and we are happy to have grabbed you after the Guardian immediately. You had a couple of good points in the Guardian article about what's happening with Brazil move. And let's start maybe from this diplomatic angle. Brazilian president has canceled the US visit to, or postponed the US visit due to what's happening with the prison case. Is that a serious step? We know that there are good relations between Brazil and US. There have always been good relations. Is it how would you classify this step? Is it an important step? Is it going to change the relations between the two countries?
To all of our participants as well. First of all, I need to say that on behalf of the Center for Technology and Society, we are very happy to be organizing this event with DiploFoundation that we found was very timely. Internet governance is one of our main areas of research, and we are looking forward to cooperate with Diplo on this area, not only in this event, but in other events in the future as well. So we are very happy to be here with Diplo. Well, with regards to your first question, I think that it's very important to mention, as you said, that the relationship between Brazil and the United States has always been very good. The U.S. is a huge political influence to Brazil since the beginning of the Republic. And of course, there were moments of serious tension, but these tensions have been successfully encapsulated and isolated, so they would not harm other areas of the relationship. So I think that both countries have come to the point that they have a very mature relationship nowadays. But I think that it's also fair, and a lot of evaluators of international relations in Brazil make this assessment, that since the government of President Lula, Brazil has taken a more autonomous and pragmatic stance when it comes to the bilateral relations with the United States. And this has to do not only with the particular views of the party who is now in power, but it has to do with the situation that has changed nationally in Brazil in terms of economic development and social development and so on, and also with changes on an international systemic level that has made Brazil a more important player in many regimes, not only in internet governance, but we see this in environmental issues, in financial issues, in commercial issues. And the US and President Obama has recognized himself that Brazil is a player that needs to be heard on all these different regimes. And in 2010, I think that this more horizontal or less asymmetric relationship, let's put it that way, has been well recognized when the two countries have started a framework with different dialogues on many issues. So they have now a global partnership to discuss high-level issues of politics on the international level. They have a specific dialogue for finance, for energy, and even for defense, which is a kind of a dialogue that you only establish with a country that you have achieved a good level of trust with. So I think that this, what has happened, and given the fact that the United States is also the second largest trading partner for Brazil, and the private actors also have a very close relationship, all this that has happened, the postponement, or the Dilma strong words at the General Assembly, or even the NSA case, this will not bring abrupt or systemic shifts to the relationship. By saying that, I don't mean that it is not important that she has postponed the visit. Given the history of the bilateral relationship, I think this is very strong. It's a very strong signal. And the bilateral relationship may not change on the diplomatic level, but the influence of the United States in Brazil has always had to do with a kind of a soft power and with the influence that the United States has in Brazilian society in terms of being a sign of freedom in a way. So I think that this image has somewhat been hard. To what extent, it's not clear yet. But if I were the US and soft power is a huge base of US power over the world, I would be concerned of how this will affect the image of the United States in Brazil nowadays. And it's interesting that one of the slides from the NSA said, asked the question, is Brazil what Brazil is to the United States? And I think that on Brazil's side, it has always been very clear that we had a good relationship. And I think that this question was kind of disappointment to a part of the Brazilian establishment or intelligentsia that has always seen the United States as a model. And of course, we don't know the context in which this question was asked, but I personally wonder if it doesn't have to do with the fact that Brazil has been an element of questioning the status quo in many different regimes. So we are asking for reform in the Security Council, we are asking for reform on financial governance, we are asking for reform on internet governance. So this is something that countries who are okay with the status quo, they might be concerned about. But an important fact about Brazil is that Brazil has always played inside the established rules. So Brazil doesn't want to disrupt the system and create a whole new system. It wants to play by the rules. It just wants the system and the rules to be more open and democratic, especially for developing countries. But I don't see these shifts, big shifts now at this moment in the bilateral relationship. Maybe we will see them in the medium term or in long term.
Marilia, Diogo, maybe a question for you. Since Marilia mentioned that already energy, security, environment, and so on were on the agenda of the relations between U.S. and Brazil, does it mean that now it is obvious that the internet is coming on the same level and will impact the future of relations between Brazil and U.S. And can it even become more important than some other areas on the longer or even long-term scale?
Thank you, Vladimir, for the question. Well, in my opinion, it's pretty hard to complement what Marilia has just stated, because it was a very complete question. And first of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity of being here talking to you, and thank you, Marilia and Fundação Getúlio Vargas for the invitation. I agree with you. I think that the overall balance of what we have seen in 2013 is a sort of conscience regarding the importance of internet governance as a structural feature of international relations these days. And I think that it is now very clear, especially because this issue was brought to the General Assembly of the United Nations, which is the forum for articulating the whole political agenda for international politics, that we have a pressing issue that upon which finance, upon which general global communications, and also security and defense, upon which those issues they depend. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that progressively more and more internet governance is becoming the key variable for explaining policy making opportunities, risks, and also possibilities for different countries. So I would probably say that your perception is completely right, and that if we were still working with the idea of a high politics and a low politics agenda, which was a remarkable way of splitting the international agenda, the international agenda during the 80s and the 90s in international relations theory, I would say that today internet politics and internet governance has become part of this high politics, which will be progressively more and more dealt with within the realms of traditional diplomatic channels. But that does not mean, for instance, that multi-stakeholderism is losing space, and that diplomacy is going to become more and more, diplomacy surrounding the internet is going to become more and more discussed behind closed doors. I think that this specific event and the cancellation of President Dilma's visit to the U.S., as you mentioned in the beginning of your question, was symptomatic of the Brazilian option of not treating these issues and the NSA scandal behind closed doors, because it deals with the public good, it deals with the internet, it deals with something that is common to all peoples, all nations, all countries at the same time. I would personally say that Brazil was, and any other country is, aware of espionage and monitoring, surveillance. In this event, a lot of former Brazilian ambassadors, ministers, they all said, "Oh, you know what? We are actually very aware of what are the espionage techniques that people use these days. We actually didn't know the extension and the complexity of the North American espionage system these days." For you to have an idea, let's just recall the Cablegate scandal, the WikiLeaks scandal in 2010. It was pretty clear since 2009, 2010, that there was a profiling of Brazilian politicians, a sort of network mapping of all the contacts of the president. And now, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we just realized that this has been done exploring fiber optic cables, internet servers, and so on. And what happened was this sort of very fast pace of the way that secret government secrets from the U.S. they became public. Therefore, I understand that canceling the travel to the U.S. was strategic not only for Brazil, it was also strategic for the U.S., mostly because what has happened right after Dilma delivered her speech to the General Assembly was a extreme focus on the condemnation aspects, the harsh message that she delivered to the U.S. instead of seeing all the propositional aspects of her speech. Just imagine Dilma and Obama, they would go to a sort of a closed door meeting, then they would come to a press conference, and the way that they would be judged and evaluated by their responses to how the harm to the Brazilian people and to the Brazilian country would be redressed, and how would the U.S. apologize. I mean, these things would add further complication to a situation which could be completely controlled and was not at all completely unexpected. And I think that instead of taking this issue to the bilateral channels, Dilma had a very important move of showing to the international community that the internet is a very serious aspect of modern life, and that we have to take it to a higher level of discussions, which is in the Brazilian case, in the Brazilian diplomatic tradition, this sort of global level of adjusting and making policies for the global level.
Diego, one interesting thing that you mentioned was the impact of President Dilma's cancellation on multi-stakeholderism. And maybe I can get back to Marilia with the next issue. We know that Brazil thus far has been quite a supporter of multi-stakeholder model. As Diego said, it is interesting to analyze now whether this is going to make a step away from multi-stakeholderism or not. Because on one hand, moving it on a higher level as the United Nations system definitely can be perceived as a step away from multi-stakeholderism. On the other hand, as Diego said, solving these issues behind the closed doors on bilateral level is definitely not enough transparent and is definitely against multi-stakeholderism to some extent. But then at the same time, we notice the moves, which might be induced by the Brazilian move as well, but definitely by the NSA PRISM case, is that, for instance, Pakistan has a couple of days ago came up with within the UN Human Rights Council on behalf of a number of states like Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, Indonesia, Iran, China, and so on, asking or commenting that the current models, like the Internet Governance Forum, have not showed the results and are not sufficient anymore. What do you think, Marilia, that the next position or the position of Brazil in future on a global level when it comes to multi-stakeholderism is going to be?
The national level, maybe multi-stakeholderism will be reinforced or strengthened after the Snowden case. And I say this for two main reasons. The first one is that one of the effects of the NSA case has been that the government now has as a priority to approve the civil rights framework for the internet, the Maciel bill, which is a very interesting bill that sets the rights and responsibilities of actors on the internet that has been discussed in a very open and collaborative way with people online. So this bill, to me, is one of the embodiments of multi-stakeholderism, of a multi-stakeholder way of discussing things related to the internet. So if this bill indeed gets approved in the short term, I think that it is a signal that a whole process that has been multi-stakeholder has come to a good ending. The second point is that after the NSA, one of the actors that Dilma called in to hear opinions was CGIBR, our Internet Steering Committee, which is organized in a multi-stakeholder model. And before in Brazil, there have been some concerns that CGIBR was losing ground, politically speaking, in terms of the influence that it has over policy discussions related to the internet. And maybe other bodies have been advancing more, discussing these topics, and CGIBR was losing ground. And I think that after the NSA, Dilma wanted to hear as many inputs as she could to make a decision, and she called in CGI. So I think this was a very strong signal that she supports this multi-stakeholder model for Brazilian internet governance. Another point was that if you look at her speech at the General Assembly, a lot of the points were driven from the decalogue of principles for internet governance that has been created by CGIBR. So when she mentions that internet governance should be multilateral with full participation of government, civil society, and the private sector, this is something that comes from the CGI set of principles for internet governance. So she also sends a signal that she wants to follow these principles that have been discussed in a multi-stakeholder way. So I think that there are a lot of signals, and we can discuss later on if there are questions about it. Why she used multilateral? Why didn't she use multi-stakeholder? And so on. We can discuss a little bit that further. But I think that there are nationally strong signals that Brazil wants to stick to the multi-stakeholder model. And I think that Brazil has called to itself a responsibility to be one of the actors that want to see changes in the global regime of internet governance by other reasons that are not related to exert more control over the internet. I think that you have to separate. Different countries want to see changes for different reasons. And the reason why Brazil wants to see changes are not related to have more control over the internet, but to take the internet under the United Nations for a states-only decision-making process. But it wants to see more countries being able to participate in a horizontal way, bringing in other actors as well. Can Brazil deliver it? Can Brazil call to itself the responsibility to be this actor that will try to move change forward? I don't know. I think that Brazil is understaffed to deal with many internet-related issues nowadays. If you look at the different bodies that work with the internet in Brazil, you may mention the Brazilian Cyber Command that deals with security. It's highly understaffed. You may mention even Itamaraty has one division to deal with information society that, in my understanding of Itamaraty, has the same number of people or the same power that a division that deals with audiovisual promotion of works. So I think that inside the country, and Anatel, for instance, when it calls meetings about internet governance, Anatel is our regulatory body of communications. It doesn't have remote participation mechanisms for other actors to participate. So I think that in terms of infrastructure, we have very good public servants, but we don't have the institutions and the infrastructure inside the country, so Brazil could perform this more advanced role globally. So I think that we need to invest on both levels. We are in a very good position to call to ourselves these responsibilities because we walk the talk. We talk about multi-stakeholderism and we perform like that. So our speech in the global level has a lot of legitimacy, but then on the other hand, we need to reinforce internally our own staff and practices to deal with internet governance. Then we'll be able to make a sustainable contribution globally as well.
Very interesting point is that on one hand, Brazil is still preserving the multi-stakeholder model within the country. On the other hand, as you said, Brazil might be still encouraging the multi-stakeholder model on the global level, even though the two terms are being used, multi-stakeholder and multilateral. So we have still to see what the multilateral, whether it should mean the same. Ilona posted a good comment that fits well. She says that we can understand that the digital policy, openness, internet governance are the priority. the global politics, probably including Brazil, and that's no doubt. But the question is how to tackle this problem. Which model of IG is the most appropriate, and especially now? And back to what I said, and then I might post this question to Diego. Back to what I said, that we have now a front of other countries where we had them before as well, led by Russia, China, well, even India to some extent, but certainly Iran and now Pakistan. That might be even again the models that we used to have thus far. So, Diego, do you think that Brazil was still pushing for such a model as it was the IGF? Or what would be the model that Brazil might push in future that keeps multi-stakeholderism to some extent? And after all, can it do it? Is it possible? Brazil is strong when it comes to pushing its own opinion in internet governance, but is it realistic that after NSA it can push and support multi-stakeholderism?
Okay, Vladimir, thank you, and thank you very much for those two questions. I understand that we have a question related to, the first question is related to what sort of model of internet governance, and then your final question is related to, so can Brazil push for that? I would like to add a further comment on what Marilia just mentioned. Yesterday I was listening to the official press news program on the radio, and Marilia even made a joke. Nobody listens to that, but I was listening to it, and I heard a sort of formal explanation of President Dilma of her move to the United States. I can even post it to the Diplo community afterwards, a translation of what she said, and she said, listen, we don't want the United Nations to take control of the internet. I don't agree with this model of governance, which is only which only comprises states. What I try to call the attention of the global community, using the opportunity of the General Assembly, which is highly visible, and just put yourself in the position that Brazil opens the General Assembly as a tradition. So we have what is called in politics the agenda setting first move, was to say that, okay, let's not turn the internet into a matter of war. And I think that we have to call upon the United Nations to ensure that the UN Charter is observed in relation to the protection of fundamental rights of peoples and also of states. But there's no way that we are supporting, she said, a internet governance which is dominated by the United Nations. And then I would have to say that we have a very, very, very controversial term, which is multilateral in the context of her speech. What she was trying to say is that internet governance has to comprise a plurality of actors. And we should not treat internet governance as something which is has a narrow focus on two specific actors. And then some people would say, and even some counselors for the Internet Steering Committee in the country, they said, we're pretty fine with the way she used the term multilateral, because multilateral means putting very different parties, no matter if they are state actors or non-state actors, to the table. Multi-stakeholderism is a sort of democratic method of doing politics. And let's say that both the preparatory works of the Brazilian speech, as well as the ulterior speeches that were delivered by very, very keen politicians in Brazil, both in the country and abroad, they highlighted the fact that democracy in relation to internet governance means putting all the stakeholders to the table. And what we observed after the Snowden revelations, and that's why President Dilma got closer to the steering committee of the internet governance, is that several different actors in the country, the private sector, the Ministry of Communications, all of them, they came with several different and controversial opinions of how to enhance the security of the country. And then the president herself, who's a very, very, very skillful manager, she said, well, some of these opinions, they are contradictory. Some of them, they don't make sense. I have to, as Marilia said, I have to listen to more and more people. And then she realized that, well, our multi-stakeholder Internet Steering Committee is in a position to advise better than any other individual or single agency in this country, be it public or be it private. And then that means that, as Marilia said, all of the wording has to be backed by solid policies. And we really expect that the Bill of Rights or the framework of rights for the Internet country could be the first step in contributing for this enhancement of capacity of Brazil. So with that, I try to answer your question. I think that the Snowden case, and it's very, very recent, has shown, and that's the overall takeaway from everything that has happened. The American actions, they dealt with the infrastructure level of the Internet. They dealt with the superior layer of applications. They even dealt with the protocols and standards layer of Internet. And then when political actors, be them state actors or non-state actors, they realize that only an integrated solution that comprises these three layers is the one that can produce the most sound policies. It seems to me that it's going to be a sort of a logical conclusion that the idea of putting people responsible for these three layers to the table to find the best solutions for tackling policy problems will be the automatic result of that. Of course, there's the risk that these ideas, they be subverted, and we need follow-up. I would say that it's pretty recent what has happened. The Brazilian response was a response, a sort of mea culpa, saying, okay, yes, let's go back to table, let's find a different model. And I think that we have to separate things into levels. One is the level, let's include everybody. Two, let's find a sort of a method, which would be what we have been called multi-stakeholderism for doing that. And we have to find a way of enforcing decisions in a way, or reaching consensus in the way that decisions are accepted by these actors. I would say that the issue with the IGF is related to the advancement of the process, which has been developed under the auspices of the enhanced cooperation process, which would be the way of enhancing even more this idea of putting everybody together, making decisions which are acceptable by all the stakeholders involved, and which are implemented as a result of the legitimacy of the process.
Thank you, Diego. A couple of comments were posted on the chat, which mostly go around that we agree in a way what the topics are, but we are searching for a model. So how are we going to assure that this public issues are respected and so on? And Diana also mentioned that Internet is a free medium, and if you put it under state authority, it will fail. Multi-stakeholder can be a good solution that maintains sovereignty. So that's where I maybe wanted to go next, probably back to Marilia, is on one hand, we are talking about the multi-stakeholderism on the local and on the global level. On the other hand, we have the tendencies of some states to move towards greater sovereignty of states. Whether that's in conflict or not, that might be the first question. But the second question is, if we take a look at what Brazil has announced to be doing when it comes to the local, to in a way preserving the privacy and data protection of local citizens, Brazilian citizens, Brazil mentioned the setting up of internet exchange points. It mentioned the links with BRICS countries through cables. It mentioned keeping or forcing the cloud providers like Facebook, Google, and so on to store the Brazilian data in Brazil. Is that a step towards sovereignty and even fragmentation of the internet, or is it on contrary to the support of multi-stakeholderism and what Diana maybe mentioned, kind of a good sovereignty, a positive case of that, Marilia?
Moments in which we thought that the internet could not be territorialized. I think that the policies that some countries have put in place to control content on the internet, the firewalls and so on, it proves us that the internet can be re-territorialized and fragmented. So I think that is a real concern of the measures that are going to be put in place, because the countries are under a lot of pressure to react to the Snowden case. And some of the policies that are decided upon in a hush, they may not be good policies. So in Brazil, for instance, the first measure of the government was try to approve the civil rights framework fastly, but the government has also tried to introduce some new measures in the civil rights framework. Some of them were good. The provisions related to privacy of citizens were reinforced in the civil rights framework, but others were not that good, such as the provision to make these big companies have the data of Brazilian citizens stored here. We have not seen the drafting of this proposal yet because it circulated inside the government, but some inside information has told us that it relates to the data of the citizens to be stored in data servers in Brazil. It relates to the content of communication. So if one party in the communication is a Brazilian, then this communication needs to be stored in Brazil. And if there is a copy of this content of communication somewhere, then if there is a litigation, the Brazilian law would apply. It would be something along these lines. We're not very sure about the exact text yet. Our view is that this is technically very complicated to be implemented. And besides that, if Brazil wants data to be stored in Brazil, then it should create the conditions for data services to be in Brazil. Like in Brazil right now, it's a very complicated environment in terms of innovation, in terms of prices. It's less costly to store data in the US. Even Brazilian companies store data in the US because it's less expensive. So Brazil should not try to enforce this by law, but create the market conditions so the Brazil is receptive to this kind of investment and for data servers to come here. But other measures that are not related to the civil rights framework, I think are good ones, such as the idea of the BRICS table. BRICS now corresponds to 45% of the population of the world. It corresponds to 25% of the GDP. So I think it's not, you cannot explain that so much traffic over the internet has to be routed to the US to achieve the destination. So I think that to decentralize this infrastructure is a good measure. I don't think that this brings risks of fragmentation, even the internet exchange points. I think it makes a lot of sense for more information to be routed inside the region. And I think this is what the Council of Planning in the South American States Union, UNASUR, will try to implement. More exchange points, more cables in the region, so the traffic can flow inside South America. So I think there are good measures. There are measures that are not very good, but this push towards doing something, this pressure that the NSA case creates, puts country into a need to develop policies in a happy manner that can even fragment the internet. Bad things can happen. So I think that this is why it's so important now to reinforce multi-stakeholder structures where they exist, so the governments are able to receive these different inputs from the technical community, from private companies, so the governments can assess what they can do without harming the internet right now.
Thank you, Marilia. One comment that was in the same Guardian article, that the new feature, and then I can maybe pose this question to Diego, is, okay, fine, so even if Brazil succeeds to take a control over its data, which is, as Marilia said, tricky. We know that these cloud providers like Facebook and Google and the other services, their business model is the data and access to data. So even if you keep the data within the country, in order for their business model to function, they need the access to the data. So if they need the access to this data, it's still possibly compromised to the NSA again, since these companies are in US. But the question is, even if Brazil succeeds to have the control over its data, is it good on the long term? And the comment, I think it was from Gillian York, was what can happen if in future, okay, now you have Dilma Rousseff and you have a democratic system, what can happen if in future an autocratic regime comes? If, as some would say, another Ahmadinejad, Brazilian Ahmadinejad, or even Hugo Chavez shows up and takes the control over that, isn't that a bigger risk than having it in a way, okay, I wouldn't say globalized, but with some greater impact of different parties, including the US and NSA and the others? That's a devil's advocate question, maybe. This question goes to Diego, just to make it clear.
Okay, all right. My mic was not turned on. I totally agree with your fear and with your perceptions of the risks of what Brazil is trying to accomplish, and I share them with you. And also, I think that they are the results of what we have tried to show, both Marilia and I, since the beginning, that there's a pressing need for policy proposals. And what we have been observing in this policy landscape in the country is some sort of double-edged solutions. So at the same time that they can contribute to retain traffic over our lines, such as internet exchange points, which are increasing here, they can also mean more control, and they can also be interpreted as ways of fragmenting the global internet. And that's what actually some of the news accounts of the Brazilian policies, they have tried to depict that. Well, I can quote, for instance, the Washington Post saying that Brazil is trying to divorce itself from the internet. And the other thing that I took note here was that Brazil was adopting a socialist model of governing its internet. What I would like to say is that one has to put all these policy proposals that are now being publicized in a broader context of policy making in Brazil. And then I can connect to what Marilia said in the beginning of her speech. From time to time, there are trends of autonomy.
Okay, and we seems to have lost Diego.
What Diego was saying. Is it okay?
Yeah, it seems like we've lost Diego for a moment. Diego, are you still there?
Yeah, he can complement when he comes back. Well, I think that your question is very good, because Brazil doesn't have a data protection bill in the country. A lot of countries in South America. Can you hear me?
Hello? Yes, I can hear you. I don't know what happened. Did I lose connection?
We lost you for a moment. So now.
Diego, I took your flow for a moment since Marilia started to address the same question. Then I'll get back to you. Marilia, go on.
The risk of storing data in Brazil. It's a very good question, because Brazil doesn't have a data protection bill. A lot of countries in the region and in the world have data protection bills, and Brazil doesn't have it. We have a very good bill under discussion, but it's not adopted yet. So if we store data in Brazil, civil society doesn't have a legal guarantee that this data is going to be protected from the government. I think that we need to have this kind of protection as well. We saw when the social mobilizations were taking place in Brazil, we saw that the government tried to establish some kind of way to monitor what was being discussed in social networks, so they could respond to the mobilizations. And these responses have been very different in different states of Brazil. We have states where the police let go and people could take to the streets. We have another state such as Rio de Janeiro, that the police come really strongly against the people that were on the streets. So Brazil is not a whole harmonious country. There are different ways of dealing with mobilizations and so on. And this is something that concerns us. We need a data protection bill to even feel more secure that it is a good step to store Brazilian data inside Brazilian territory. So you have these different ways of addressing things. But I don't think that it should be a concern not only to Brazil. That is why I think it's so important to discuss this on the international level. And I very much like that Dilma took this issue to the United Nations to say, okay, this shouldn't be a one-country solution. Otherwise, we will have the risk of fragmenting the internet. We need to sit on the table and discuss what is going on, to put some limits to policies such as the policy that has been carried out by the NSA. The problem is, where are we going to take this? And I think that it relates to your question on models of internet governance globally. There are some issues that we don't find a space to discuss anywhere in the UN. And because we don't have that space to discuss in a way that we can make decisions and have clear, concrete outcomes, there is a push to take these issues into organizations where they don't belong, such as the International Telecommunications Union, that shouldn't be a place to discuss other issues than telecommunications, but security is being pushed there. So I think that we as a community, if we want to preserve the multi-stakeholder model, we need to recognize the failures of this model and to make a critic and to try to come up with solutions. And we have this working group on enhanced cooperation now that is working on to find some model of internet governance that would embody enhanced cooperation. Instead of saying we don't want any changes and we think that we are good as it is, we have a clear problem, and the NSA shows that we have a problem. So why not admit it and try to see how we can integrate both things, the participation of countries and the participation of other actors in a way that is sustainable and feasible, even in a process of co-decision. Let's be creative. Let's think about new procedures where governmental actors and non-governmental actors can engage in co-decision, that any of them can take a decision alone, but listening to the other. But we need to be creative. To deny that we have a problem, I think that is what is really weakening the idea of multi-stakeholderism. And maybe to make this final question, this final comment, I think that multi-stakeholderism, Dilma mentioned multilateral with participation of civil society, government, and private sector. And I think this was very understandable on her side for two reasons. First of all, because of the language from the Charter of Principles of CGIBR. So she's quoting a national document, and I think this is very significant. The second point is that I think that multi-stakeholderism is becoming a loaded word politically. Some actors are using it in a very good way, and they want it to be implemented in a way that everybody can participate, while other actors are using multi-stakeholderism as a word to prevent any change from happening in the system. So I think that there is this perception from countries that want to see changes that multi-stakeholderism is being used as a scapegoat. And so I think this is not good for any actors that are involved that want real multi-stakeholderism to be preserved on the international level. So this is why, for two reasons, I think that she didn't use this word, and I think it's understandable. But she made clear by putting together multilateral with the participation of civil society first, and this is significant, government and private sector on the internet governance. So I think that this is something that we need to discuss. If we want to preserve multi-stakeholderism, the way to do it is to discuss how to implement this on the international level in a way that is feasible, sustainable, and that everybody can participate and be creative.
I would take it as $1 million question, how to. Diego, maybe a short comment since we interrupted you, or the connection was, and then we take a couple of questions till the end of the next 10 minutes. Diego.
What I was trying to say when probably the NSA just took my connection away was that all of these policies that are being published now, they are a product of the last decade in Brazil. For instance, Bolivia and Paraguay, which don't have access to the ocean, they have a hard time in the South American region to get access to the global internet. So what I'm trying to say is that we have some regional cables being deployed as a sort of a regional policy initiative. Some parts of Brazil, they only get access to the internet through satellites. We don't have broadband cables that reach the northwest part of the country, for instance, in the Amazon region and some of very remote places in the country. What I'm trying to say is all of these policies that are now on the spot because of the NSA scandal, they were deployed. They have been developed since the beginning of the 2000s as a way of follow up our stakes in infrastructure and capacity building in the countries, and they can be interpreted, and they can also, in non-democratic contexts, be deployed as a way of furthering government control, etc., etc. That's why I think it's important, all of this move of creating a broader agenda of internet governance, which tackles public policy related questions on the global level, so that we can establish some sort of fundamental principles and rights, fundamental rights, which are related to the sort of vectorial way of deploying technology, to avoid that it becomes a sort of mere fact that, okay, autocratic governments can do whatever they want because they are sovereign to do whatever they want under their realms and so on. That's why I'm trying to say that these double-edged policies, which can serve both for economic and social development, which is the case of Brazil, they can also go to the other side of repression and autocracy. We have to have standards upon which we can judge countries and policymakers on the global level, such as we have for fundamental human rights, for genocide, and for other sorts of crimes of war and crimes against nature. I'm sorry, crimes against humanity. I'm really sorry.
Thank you, Diego. We have a couple of questions and another maybe 7 minutes of the time remaining. Let me go through or try to summarize into the 2 key questions and back to you for a short final comment. The first one relates to the to what extent the BRICS cable, the announced BRICS cable, can be harmonized with the position of the multi-stakeholderism and tendency not to be disruptive towards an internet ecosystem. And since there are some alarming stories in media about the BRICS cable, can it be expected that the US answer back to what Brazil has raised in the UN General Assembly might be exactly attacking this intention to come up with the BRICS cable? I think to some extent, Carolina also responded on this question, reflected on this question in chat, saying that this means that Brazil is basically becoming an internet infrastructure provider as is US and the others. So there are more options than before, and I think Marilia also mentioned that before. But I leave it to 2 of you to reflect. And the second question relates to the critical resources. And Javier said that how can we expect a better multi-stakeholder model since we know that the critical resources like the DNS system is under the US jurisdiction? So is this going to make a move? Is this talk about the cables going to make a move towards discussion on critical resources as well, which means the root zone and the DNS and the icon function as well? Diego, maybe we start with you and then we keep Marilia for the final word.
All right. I totally agree with the idea, and as I tried to mention, the BRICS cable shall not be considered, at least from the Brazilian perspective, and in the case of Brazil, as a sort of development of our natural efforts to build infrastructure as one of the pillars of Brazil's orientation for this century. And I don't see why the U.S. would simply condemn this initiative, mostly because one of the ends of this cable is the United States, if I'm not mistaken, Miami. So it's not only a BRICS cable; it's a BRICS plus the U.S. cable. Also, in regards to the critical internet resources, I totally agree with the perception of I forgot his name now, but if I'm not mistaken, it's Javier, right? We still face a situation in which ICANN itself, if despite of the fact that it has a sort of multi-stakeholder model with all its sort of complementary issues and all its sort of problematic issues, it is still identified by part of the stakeholders as operating within the North American legal system. And the whole contractual structure of the DNS system is much more prone to the common law of the United States than to the other Roman and European law systems. I think, yes, the idea is that we have to discuss a way of retaining stability of the internet in the first place, but we have also to tackle the idea of completely internationalizing ICANN, in my humble opinion.
Diego, probably the hot question at the end to Marilia is how to do that when it comes to ICANN. So Marilia, maybe a short reflection on the two questions, one about BRICS and the other BRICS cable, the other about the DNS, and a final wrap up of the session, Marilia.
Well, I think that the BRICS cable, it's a natural evolution of internet infrastructure. If you look at the map of how the cables are deployed worldwide, it's so concentrated, not only in the US, but in the north part of the globe as a whole, that I think that this initiative between the countries is a natural way of decentralizing and making the infrastructure even more robust by finding other ways for the traffic to be routed. So I don't feel that this is something that is going to disrupt the internet in any way, and I don't think that the US will come against it. And as Diego said, it's not a BRICS-only cable as the idea has been circulated. The cable will have a point that goes up to the United States. It's just an initiative from the BRICS that the traffic will be circulated among them and will not have to be routed through the United States when it doesn't make sense technically that it has to be routed there. So I don't think this is a problem at all. Concerning ICANN, this is a hot topic that never died. I think that since the beginning of the Summit on the Information Society, countries have been discussing ways to internationalize ICANN. I think ICANN itself has recognized that the regime needs to change. The Memorandum of Understanding has been substituted by an affirmation of commitments. I think some steps have been taken to make ICANN less connected to the United States government. More things can be done. But I don't think that this debate in the UN is related to ICANN right now, because enhanced cooperation makes very clear the paragraph that deals with it in the Tunis agenda, that it's not related to the day-to-day management of the internet. And some people interpret this as it's not related to the IP system, to the DNS system. So when we talk about enhanced cooperation, of course, we can interpret this in many ways, but I think that the more urgent things are these public policies that don't find a home in other organizations and need to be tackled with urgency internationally. So, well, to wrap up, I would say that this is an interesting move on international relations. I think that it's very good that a country that has the base of legitimacy of walking the talk like Brazil with the multi-stakeholder model that we have here has been the country that has taken the position to raise this strongly internationally. And I hope that we find the space, we all the stakeholders find the space and the opportunity to develop the discussion further, to make not only multi-stakeholderism better, but also to make the system better and more secure for us all, preventing this steps towards fragmentation of the internet that might be taken by some countries in the face of the NSA regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilia. There were a couple of final points from participants as well. Geneva mentioning that it's the cable, the BRICS cable, and any other is also a matter of Europe and basically all the other parts of the world, as was this discussion today. Vanessa mentioned that BRICS cable is the evolution of the infrastructure, something that all developing countries look for as well. And Carolina sent a couple of very interesting maps when it comes to the underwater cables, the fibers, backbone fibers, and so on. I think the discussion on this will definitely go on, but I think we did shed quite some light on the, not only BRICS cable, of course, but the Brazilian move, and even this a little bit of being frightened about the future position of Brazil, whether it's still going to support multi-stakeholderism and FAO, and I think both of you, Diego and Marilia, help us to get a better picture of that. I want to thank you again for coming to the webinar. We'll definitely keep on following this with blogs and so on. Thank you everyone for coming today. There will be a summary of the webinar very soon, and video archives for anyone who missed the part or missed the whole webinar, so you can share it further. And well, catch up soon for another topic, and we'll go on following this one. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.